Hello, everybody. Dan and I are here together today. We're going to double your fun with bad albums on this video. Dee and I are here for a series called Off the Rails. We're going to talk about two consecutive albums by a band that became pretty huge in the 1970s. But Dee is going to kick us off with his take on when Yes Jumped the Shark. And then after Dee's finished, I'm going to follow up because I have a different opinion of when Yes actually jumped the shark, and it was the album following the one that Dee's going to talk about. So Dee, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Why do you think Tales from Topographic Oceans was a bad album?
All right. I don't think it was a musically bad album, but it was the album where Yes lost me. And I don't know if that was my, inability to appreciate what they were doing or where they were going. I listened to it one time back in the day, and that was it. And I revisited Tales from Topographic Oceans recently, and this is a double album of some of the densest progressive rock at the time. And bear in mind, at this time when they released this, 1973, they were leading their division in progressive rock. They were coming off a pretty good run of, the Yes album, where I was initially introduced to them, and then Fragile, which had commercial and artistic success. And then Close to the Edge, which was, and you could see a progression, their music getting more complex, leaning into that classical / progressive rock. And yeah, they were at the top of their game. I mean, other bands of that era, King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I think, yes, they had broke through from the pack. But with this one, it is a lot to consume and swallow. Tales from Topographic Oceans, I believe it was inspired and taken from Hindu prayers that John Anderson came across, or Hindu teachings, and they, composed music to it. But, up until this album, I believe, they put out some magnificent stuff, and they took you on musical journeys that, nobody else had. But with this one, Tales from Topographic Oceans, for me, that they went over the rainbow and then they went over the edge. That's not to say that there's not some little gems in here. I mean, the first opening, the revealing science of God, there's some brilliant passages, just brilliant, but you have to wait for it. And each one of these pieces, I think the entire double album is like maybe an hour, 25 minutes. And, there are times when you take this in and it's like, yes, they wanted to sound like John Cage, Igor Stravinsky, and a celestial choir, along with some Steve Howe solos. And, I felt like, except for the most diehard Yes fans, and I consider myself a Yes fan of a certain period, that's true, but I will defend their earlier work. But this one, it's put too many bricks in the boat and you're sinking, and that's the way I felt like it. There's you trip over to the third one, The Ancient. It starts out like kind of a jazz rock percussion. It shows off Alan White's talents, and all of these guys, all of them were virtuosos, I believe, at their individual instruments. Rick Wakeman, keyboards, Chris Squire, bass guitar, Steve Howe, John Anderson. But the mix just didn't work. And, what's the overall intent? And, I felt like I was getting hit with a tidal wave of, a little bit of dissonance is good, but I got hit with the tidal weight of jazz rock dissonance. And, I think some of these passages were maybe they had in mind, it would have been a soundtrack to a futuristic medieval fable, maybe that's what it is. or maybe what they were doing wasn't, just for the majority of the listening audiences. But I felt like it was, for me, it was just unreachable. And then, I didn't come back to Yes till maybe 10 or 11 years later. But, there's certain passages, I think in the ancient, about 1330, you let Steve Howe do what he does best, I think. And that's when he lets loose on acoustic guitar playing classical passages. And, it's some of the transitions are very, very nice. And there is moments of brilliance in this work, but it's just the sheer weight of it. To listen to it from start to finish, it would be like, pushing your car uphill by yourself. It was just, I think, the sheer weight of it. And then, the themes of these grand themes that John Anderson writes about, and you wonder who he's talking to, who the audience is. And I felt it was in its attempt to be almost ethereal and far-reaching. The distance between the band and the listener was lengthened to about a football field. With the exception of the musical virtuosity, which is always there, I just came away with sort of a very just indifference. That's the way I had it. But there's moments here, and so yes, fans, don't all crucify me, but that's your prerogative. But that's what happened. I think it just got to the point where they tried to make it more and more musically difficult. And because I think I was changing too, I think for me, progressive rock had served its purpose. It could not take me any other places that it had not already different. And this was, to me, was like another step.
I do not disagree with your assessment at all. But what happened with me is I made the mistake of getting through this one and going to the next album, Relayer. Just to before I move to Relayer, just to give a couple of comments on what Dee just talked about. It's perfect. I've always liked to say that their big masterpiece was Close to the Edge, and then they followed it up by Going Over the Edge. But it was okay. Side one was good. Side two was good, but none of them fantastic. But I could deal with that. But then I got to side three with the one you talked about, where they just go off on his jazz fusion stuff, and they lost me on that. So when I would pull this album out, I would listen to side one and side two. I would skip side three. I would go to side four. And about half of side four was pretty good. About half of side four was just kind of crap. Rick Wakeman agreed too with your assessment, Dee, because Wakeman got so fed up with this that he left the band. He didn't like this at all. He left after this. And so the four of them huddled to do a follow-up. And they stumbled on this guy named Patrick Moraz to replace Wakeman for their next album titled Relayer. And what both of us disliked so much about side three, which was part of the Tales from Topographic Oceans, well, Relayer was an entire album that was built around that stuff. I mean, it was just cacophony. And it was basically they became a jazz fusion jam band on this. There's no structure to it. It's just Steve Howe just bouncing all over the place with his guitar, and it was Patrick Moraz just bouncing all over the place, and Chris Squire just playing his bass, and Alan White just playing his drums, and every once in a while John Anderson would come along and sing a passage. You know, there are two spots on this album at the very end. Side one of Relayer is a track called The Gates of Delirium. It's the full side. About the last 4 minutes of it is a nice little John Anderson tune, which they released as a single titled Soon. And it's a great little song, 3 or 4 minutes of it. But you know, that comes after about 17 minutes of just garbage, you know. And then you flip it over, and it was like, so there are 2 tracks on side 2, and the second track, parts of that second track are fine, but that was the one where I just jumped off the Yes bandwagon after trying to listen to Relayer. I remember I went out and bought it when it came out, and I listened to it, and this is garbage, and I never bought another Yes album again after that. It was just crap. I will say, though, that they came to their senses after Relayer. Apparently, now knowing the history of Yes, they came to their senses, and they realized that they just went too far over the edge, off the deep end, off the rails, whatever you want to call it. And they decided to dial it back and go back to doing, you know, shorter, more focused songs. And they actually brought Rick Wakeman back when they convinced him that they were going to go back in the direction he wanted to go to. And he came back, and they recorded a follow-up to Relayer called Going for the One, which actually turned out to be a pretty good Yes album. But it's not a Yes album that I even heard for years until after it came out, you know. And it was okay, you know. It was back to what Yes did so well in the early 70s, you know, more shorter, more focused songs, you know, just some good prog. But by that time, you know, the window had passed, you know. Yeah. And they've pretty much been bouncing all over the place ever since then. And just to say that this Relayer, and there are a lot of longtime Yes fans who like this album, but you know, but I don't know why. You know, I went back. I hadn't listened to it in years. I went back and listened to it a couple of days ago, and it was just as much garbage now as it was 50 years ago. It's just terrible. And I know that Steve Howe is now taking, you know, this outfit now that he has together that he's calling Yes. They're getting ready to go out on because they're doing they're doing a series of tours where they're calling, I think they're calling it the album series, but they go out on a tour, and they did the Yes album, the entirety of the Yes album. And they went out on tour and did the entirety of Close to the Edge album, whatever. They were going to do this with Relayer a couple years ago, and it got delayed by the pandemic, and then it got delayed again, and now they're getting ready to go out on it again this year, and they had to cancel it because they couldn't get insurance against acts of war or COVID-related issues, you know. So they had to cancel the tour because they couldn't get anybody to underwrite the insurance for it. Yeah, this was the real 73 and 74. This is where Yes really went off the rails, and you know they've been trying to find the glory for 45 years ever since then, and they never have gotten back there. They've had their moments over the last 4 decades, but nothing like like what they had in the early 70s and those 3 albums, that run of 3 albums that Dee talked about, which is probably the I don't know if there have been many 3 album runs like that by anybody ever. You can make an argument, but those 3 were right up there with some of the best 3 album runs ever in the rock era. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back over the next week or so with some more of these off the rails bad albums and good discography discussions. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, drop a comment, and we will talk to you soon. So long.
Now you got the right to sing the old man blues. They're trading your Playboy for some hush puppy shoes. One more time.